Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, be aware that the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Okay, welcome back to Culte Veritatis podcast. My name is Leon Filger.
I am Ood Gallifrey.
In studio with us special guests,
Dan West.
And
Chelsea B.
On tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works and Lockheed's U-2 spy plane. But first, what's your poison?
So, what's your poison?
Okay, here we go.
So, today we've got sugar-free Red Rain energy drink, which is a knockoff of sugar-free Red Rave energy drink, which is a knockoff of sugar-free Red Bull energy drink.
It cost 55 cents at my local Dollarama.
I imagine it's going to taste just as fucking shitty as Red Bull.
Only 55 cents?
Yeah, and you can buy Cokes, 3 for 80 cents.
What? Is it like a brand name cola or a...
I think it's called Value Cola.
That's disgusting.
Is it not Faygo, though?
Is it like
not
fermented Red Bull or something?
When we inevitably do our episode on the Insane Clown Posse, we're going to have to get some Faygo.
That's fucking disgusting.
Oh, yeah. That's why they like it. They like it because it's bad.
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
They buy it by the truckload, I'm sure.
That's disgusting.
Because they take semi-truckloads of it on tour.
Yeah.
I wish I could undo having tasted that.
That's so, it's not, no sugar in it, right? I, wonder how much aspartame is in that.
Yeah. Would you like to try some?
I'm surprised I'm, not blind already.
Okay, here we go with Red Rain. I know what I'll do. Put on my glasses here for the visually impaired.
See, I see energy drinks not as an enjoyment, but as, a cure for, low energy and all that. And even on that standard, I find it tastes kind of bad.
Sorry.
Gave them up as of January 1st.
Oh.
So this licking the top of the can is my cheat, I guess, for the year. But no, I've given up jujubes and I've given up energy drinks.
It's your first relapse.
Yeah.
It's manufactured by Cott Beverage Canada in Mississauga, Ontario.
Oh, goody.
Okay, what's it? It's supposed to just taste red or something?
It just tastes like shit.
Thank you.
It's like lawnmower oil.
What is Red Rain? Isn't that blood?
No, it's just Red Bull that's cheaper, and this is Red Rain or Red Rave that's cheaper.
It has a weird kind of cough medicine aftertaste.
Oh, yeah.
If you're chronically addicted to caffeine and you need some caffeine to stave off a wicked headache, maybe take this. But if you want to enjoy what you're drinking, don't choose this.
No, because there's nothing enjoyable about this.
No, it's like some kind of cough syrup, like you said. Cherry-flavored cough syrup.
Yeah.
I'm going to rate it 3 aspartames out of 10 high-fructose corn syrups.
I mean, I used to be a Red Bull addict, and even on that standard, this stuff is shit, so I'm going to give it a 1 out of 10.
I'll give it a one half stick of dynamite out of 5 sticks of dynamite.
And it's been in my fridge for 5 weeks, but I'm sure it's been on the shelf
it
of
could
wherever
be in your fridge for 20 years. It wouldn't change.
Yeah.
It's embalming fluid.
I'd still drink if I was super, super desperate and it was the only thing in the house for 2 weeks.
Well, and that's,
so I'll give it a 4.
And that's the other thing. If I need mix, I'll use this because this needs some alcohol to make it good.
My name is Don Phillips. I was in the United States Air Force and had worked with certain intelligence agencies of the United States government. Prior to my Air Force, prior to joining the Air Force, I worked for the famous Lockheed Skunk Works. And I was working for them when I was attending college, and I worked for them in the capacity as a design engineer. It was one of my proudest moments of my life to work with a man by the name of Kelly Johnson. A lot of you might be familiar with that. It turns out that the models of aircraft that we were building, as you know, were all classified, were in the deep black, and that I came in on the end of the U-2 project. My main project was known later as the SR-71. The SR-71 had a predecessor. It had a special model built for the CIA, and that those models were one passenger, one pilot special aircraft in order to get from one place to another very, very quickly. Now these SR-71s, as we know them, the Blackbird, are the type of aircraft that are still classified in a sense as far as the altitude that it flies at and also the speed records that it holds. I'm very proud to say that this aircraft played a big part in helping to end the Cold War.
Alrighty, so what are we covering today?
Right, okay. Tonight on Occulta Veritatis podcast, we are looking at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works. And this is important because a couple weeks back, I did the Avro Arrow. And upon the cancellation of that project, I had talked about the Canadian brain drain with Canadian scientists and engineers flowing south. Well, loyal listeners, where did they flee south to? Lockheed Martin.
And NASA. A friend of mine, his dad worked for NASA.
Yeah, Mercury and Gemini programs.
Was on the Avro Arrow team and lost his job when that was canceled and moved elsewhere.
Yeah, Mercury program and Gemini program at NASA were both fully stocked with Canadian scientists and engineers. That all came from Avro after the Arrow was canceled. So, Lockheed Skunk Works starts unofficially in 1939. At the time, Lockheed was manufacturing reconnaissance planes for Britain just before the outset of the war. And Lockheed was one of those companies that had it in tight enough with the governments that they would unofficially get word from a leak in the government that such and such a plane with these requirements was needed, and they would immediately set about designing and building that plane so that when the government tendered the contract the next year, Lockheed was already ready to go with a fully functioning prototype.
Oh, goody.
And the first time they did this was with the P-39 Lightning I, which was a single-seat, twin-engine, twin-boom fighter that was used in the Second World War. It was very, very advanced. It was the first fighter in the war to exceed 400 miles per hour in straight level flight. It was the highest flying fighter of the war with drop tanks. It had the longest range. It was just really fantastic at everything.
Wicked plane.
It was a wicked plane. It wasn't terribly maneuverable at lower altitudes. It wasn't a good dogfighter, but it could fly higher than the enemy. So because of its drop tanks, which were another contract that was awarded under the table, Lockheed was told that their P-38 would need drop tanks, and then a month later the government issued tender, and well, look at fucking this, we've already got 200-gallon drop tanks made for it. So because of the added range, the P-38 was used for long-range bomber escort, and he was used extensively during the Pacific Theater. It was never carrier launched, but they had them stationed at Guam and Ford Field north of Pearl Harbor.
So does bomb escort protect them against other planes or against anti-aircraft?
Against other fighters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And they were incredibly successful in that war. So that was when Skunk Works, which is this top secret division of Lockheed, first unofficially was created. And then at the beginning of the 50s, it became a real thing, and they trademarked the skunk logo, and they were good to go. And they presently, and since the 50s, have operated out of several hangars in Pasadena, California. Skunk Works have been famous for putting out some really incredible aircraft, like the Lockheed U-2, which we'll talk about in a bit, the SR-71, which I'll cover in my next show. Also in that show, I'll be talking about Area 51, so if that's your thing, tune in. So Lockheed's responsible for the U-2, the best spy plane ever, until they invented the SR-71, which is now the best spy plane ever.
The Blackbird.
That's right. Yep. They were responsible for the F-22 Raptor, which is my favorite fighter jet of all time.
That's the ones that they're flying out of Cold Lake right now, right?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, never mind. Cut that.
No. There were only 100, maybe 100 or 200 and some of the Raptors built. There were some problems that showed up in the A version, like the oxygen supply ceasing to work, and so some pilots were passing out in the plane, which is problematic when you're trying to fly the plane. In my opinion, if it had stayed on the assembly line longer and they'd put more R&D into it, they could have come up with the world's best fighter jet ever. As it was in the A and B variants, the F-22 Raptor is the best thing that any arms company has ever turned out ever in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Lockheed, unfortunately, is responsible for the F-35 Lightning II, which is the worst fighter jet that's ever been designed by humans.
The money sink.
Yeah, it's the slowest fighter jet designed in 35 years.
Really?
Yeah. Canada's... I had said in the last episode when we talked about the Arrow that Canada was probably going to get shouldered with this thing.
Yeah.
There have been developments in recent weeks to the point where I don't know that's necessarily true. The Raptor is well off the assembly line, so there isn't really any hope of resurrecting it, even though I think it would be the fighter jet for us. Because we no longer require long-range capabilities of scrambling to North Pole, because the United States Air Force has got bases in Fairbanks and Anchorage.
Yeah.
They cover the pole now for us, where, in the 50s when the Arrow was first put together, the pole was sort of our domain.
Yeah, there was no stations in Alaska.
No, because NATO or NORAD didn't exist. NATO didn't exist. Now the Americans take care of the North Pole, so we don't need something with that much range.
Yeah.
The only time we're ever using our Hornets right now is international deployments, where they're sort of the inferior product now.
Yeah.
So the F-35 does everything the Hornet does, but does it a little bit worse. The Hornet was first introduced in the early 80s. The F-35 is a brand new product, and it's slower than the Hornet. It carries less armament. It doesn't work when it's cold.
Oh, yeah.
Good
for Canada.
It's perfect for Canada.
Yeah.
So at this point, I favor a couple of things. First of all, I favor Canada leaving NAFTA and joining the European Union. I know that sounds far-fetched, but I would like Canada to join the European Union. Ditch NATO.
Yeah.
That's controversial as well.
Yeah.
And I would like us to be flying the Eurofighter.
I mean, if America continues on its current path, I think that might be one of our only options.
Well, and the European Union are flying a couple of really great jets. The Eurofighter is one of them. It's got cool canard wings. You might maybe put a link to the Wikipedia for the Eurofighter on the show page.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a Lockheed product. It's built, I think, by British Aerospace, but it's a fantastic plane and a hell of a lot better than anything Lockheed's turning out right now.
Yeah, and once again, whatever planes or equipment you mention on here will be put in a slideshow, just like your last episode.
Right.
Yeah.
The F-117 Nighthawk, which I think came out in the 80s, was the world's first stealth fighter. It's ugly. If you've seen it, it's called the Black Hawk. It's not a great jet.
Yeah.
But Lockheed Martin very much pioneered stealth technology. The F-22 Raptor, like I talked about, is stealth. The F-35 is stealth, but it's horrid, so
yeah,
fuck it.
That's all we need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. So the P-38 Lightning I, best fighter jet ever built.
Yeah.
Starting in 1939. F-35 Lightning II, worst fighter jet ever built, started a few years ago. The way I'd wanted to divide up these two episodes is I wanted to talk about both the U-2 and the SR-71 because they're Skunk Works' two, brightest platforms to ever come out. And Skunk Works is the top secret division within Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin makes a bunch of other things, other aircraft, tanks. But Skunk Works was this top secret division, and the way, as I'd said briefly, it made its dues was that it had its ear to the ground and its hands in the pockets of its politicians. And when people in the departments of defense of various nations were talking about, we need a spy plane with these capabilities, these characteristics, Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works would scramble to get on it. And by the time the tender was released, they already had a flying prototype.
Oh,
so they
geez.
beat out all the other aviation companies by years.
Yeah.
And that's how they ended up scoring contracts for things like the U-2 and the SR-71.
Yeah.
Which were super cutting edge. The SR-71, as I mentioned during the Arrow episode, was built using Canadian technology that was ripped off of the Arrow after the Arrow was scrapped.
Yep.
But before the Arrow was a thing, Lockheed designed the U-2. Which is a spy plane that could fly above 70,000 feet, which is considered to be ultra high altitude.
Wow.
Nothing else could touch it. Okay, so the Lockheed U-2 had a crew of one. Tail stood 16 feet off the ground, had massively wide wings compared to its body. One engine, 2 giant fuel pods on the wings. It could stay aloft for 12 hours without aerial refueling, which in the 50s was absolutely unheard of.
Yeah.
The wing ratio was such that pilots had a great deal of difficulty landing it because they get closer to the ground. It was subject to something called ground effect lift, where air that's diverted underneath the wing bounces off the ground and bounces back up and holds the plane aloft. And the thing was such a glider that they would have to literally crash it into the runway in order to get it to stay on the ground, which was also problematic because it only had one wheel in the middle, because they needed to keep the weight way down. So anything it didn't need.
They had it on a tricycle?
No, they had one wheel in the middle, and then for takeoff, they had 2 detachable wheels on the wingtips. They had to have a chase vehicle escorting it down the runway to make sure that the wing wheels fell off properly. So as soon as the wings, which were normally sort of cantilevered down, gain lift, they'd stretch upward, and as soon as those wing wheels left the ground, the pilot would hit a button and it would jettison the wheels.
Holy!
So that when it came into land, all it had was its center wheel and had like really thin metal skids on the wings. Fortunately, they could keep that thing stable at 90 knots. So this plane on the runway is barely moving before it tips over onto one wing.
Christ. Man, they must have been serious about cutting weight out if they designed detachable wheels. I mean, that's counting for like every pound and kilogram, you know?
Well, when they're flying at 70,000 feet, the game would sort of be to have a pressurized cockpit.
Yeah.
But that took up too much weight.
Yeah.
So the pilots wore astronaut suits, pressurized suits with the astronaut helmets and the visor and everything.
Really?
Because pressurizing the cockpit cost too much money, or too much weight rather, in oxygen tanks.
So you just pressurize a suit.
Pressurize the suit.
Fuck.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. I mean, the pilots would have to go through extra training.
And there were only, I think, like 100 pilots over the course of the entire program that were certified for this aircraft.
Yeah.
So it was super top secret when it first came out. It suffered 2 losses, once in, I think, 1962, when Frank Gehry Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union.
Right, because I remember that. I remember all of that happening. It was the
Well,
height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And all this Cuba Missile Crisis and stuff like that. And it was, what's going to happen now? And then there was the prisoner exchange. And then he ended up being a helicopter traffic reporter in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And
just to jump ahead on everything you were going to say.
Lots of duck and cover drills, eh?
So he was shot down because at 70,000 feet, you're out of range of anti-aircraft fire over Russia. And they can't even see you on radar. But his engine broke down. And based on the altitude and the type of engine he had, you can't restart that type of turbojet engine at that altitude. You have to drop down to 40,000 feet in order for the air to be thick enough for the engine to restart. Once it's restarted, then you can then climb again to 70,000 feet. And while he was at that 40,000 feet trying to restart the engine, he was shot down.
Jesus. So he had to do a dead drop 30,000 feet in order to restart it, and then he got shut down.
And I mean, it's not really a dead drop because this thing was an incredible glider.
Right.
Case in point, when the thing was first developed, they were flying it sort of ferry flights around the United States to various Air Force bases. And they had one of these U-2s that was flying over Nevada, and it was just crossing the Rocky Mountains toward Utah, and its engine quit. They couldn't restart it. And the thing was able to glide halfway across the country.
Jesus.
Before it finally landed. And there were only a couple of Air Force bases in the mainland that were equipped to handle it.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean this. They had to have a hangar that was empty and ready at all times to shuffle this top secret aircraft into when it landed.
Yeah.
And there was an envelope that was kept in the control tower of these couple of Air Force bases that could accommodate this. And it said on the envelope, don't open this until you get a call from these people. And so when the engine died on that U-2, these people, whoever they were at the Air Force, phoned ahead to this Air Force base and said, that envelope we gave you, open it.
Yeah.
So they opened it and contained instructions on how to handle the U-2 because it needed a chase vehicle.
Yeah.
Because it only had one wheel. And so the envelope contained instructions on how to handle it, on how they were able to tow it to a hangar. They said within 15 minutes you need to have it under the hangar. When the thing is going to land, you need to get all the personnel near the base into the mess hall. And this is the story you're going to tell them. And there's going to be food ready for them. And it was completely elaborate because this plane had to be hidden. And it glided something like 600 miles.
Christ. And that's from 70,000 feet?
From 70,000 feet. Glided 600 miles, landed at one of these couple of Air Force bases that could handle it.
Yeah.
When they got there, the chase vehicle was ready and a tow vehicle was ready, and they had to get special wheels to prop under one of the wings when they towed it. And in 15 minutes, they had it hustled into a private hangar. And then the folks from Lockheed were flown in to fix it. And then under the cover of darkness, it was flown out of there and flown back to Groom Lake, also known as Area 51, which I'll touch on in the next show.
Oh, interesting.
So no Soviet spies could see this.
No Soviet spies could see this. And then there was another one that was shot down during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some other fellow was flying it. I'm not sure the circumstances around that. But the Frank Powers bit was important. And I'll touch on this in another episode on Soviet and U.S. espionage during the Cold War. He was traded in a spy exchange for the Rosenbergs, who were two Soviet spies who were living in the United States.
Yeah, for our Patreon people, the reason that it's just me and Sage that are taking votes for episodes right now is because Leon is constructing a very long story, and he's trying to build the storyline step by step. So we're going to let him go with that till the end, and it's going to go all the way from the Avro Arrow to, well,
so now there's the Skunk Works in the U-2, then we'll do the SR-71, then the Rosenberg Spy Exchange, Area 51, and a couple other things that I'm really looking forward to working into.
Yeah, and for anybody that wasn't aware what a Skunk Works was, it's a secret company within a company. Funds within the company are diverted and put towards a project, but the official documents within the company don't tell what that project is. So it's completely hidden.
And the big benefit to a Skunk Works, not just Lockheed Martin, which owns the trademark to Skunk Works, but any company that has a Skunk Works, the disambiguation within it, is that they don't have to deal with bureaucracy. Because a lot of other defense contractors they get a contract or a request for proposals from the Department of Defense, and then they have to send their ideas in, and they're competing with everyone else. Whereas if you like Lockheed and have a Skunk Works department, you completely cut out all that bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And because they've got their ear to the ground, they figure out what's going to be needed of them in the next 1 to 5 years, create that product, and then boom, they've won that contract because they were the first company to get in there.
Question.
Yes.
Back to Flyer Powers for a second. Where was he based? If you said there's they had a 12-hour duration in the air. So where was he based?
That's 12 hours unfueled. It was equipped for aerial refueling from the KC-135, which would operate over the Atlantic.
So wherever he was based, he could go out 6 hours and come back.
This plane could fly until his oxygen ran out.
What was his
I don't know where he was based from.
Was it Turkey, maybe? Or
it may have been. I mean,
I don't know
it had the
I'm just
capability to fly
wondering.
over the pole.
The pole?
Yeah, well, we've got, the United States has got the B-1B Lancer nuclear bomber. It's not nuclear equipped anymore, but it's supersonic, and they'll launch from a base in Missouri, fly a sortie in Afghanistan, and fly back to Missouri all in one tank of gas.
Yeah, and when I was working at Cold Lake Air Base, you would see the jets go straight up in the air probably a couple times a week, because when I was working there, the Russians were testing the limits of Canadian airspace, and when the pilots were just going on test flights, they would go on a gentle little arc up into the sky, but when they were looking to scramble and encounter these Russian jets...
They do something called an unrestricted climb.
Yes.
Where they take off with full afterburner and bust it to 40,000 feet as fast as they possibly can.
Nearly straight up.
Nearly straight up, because their engines are more efficient at 40,000 feet, so they save gas, and because they have to hustle their asses all the way to the North Pole, it makes sense to get to 40,000 feet as quickly as possible so that they can utilize the thinner air and get better efficiency from their engines. That's why they do it.
Alrighty. Yeah, so another, I guess, step in the story.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the U-2. It's such a fascinating aircraft because it flies... Like at 70,000 feet, the sky becomes dark, and you can see the curvature of the Earth. So these...
Well, no, you can't, because the Earth is flat.
The Earth is
We
flat.
know that.
Yeah.
We know that. It's been proven.
Real Earth has curves.
It's fake Earth.
The pilots, who weren't really pilots so much as astronauts, in their astronaut suits in this U-2 flying at 70,000 feet, are seeing darkened stars in the middle of the day and the curvature of the Earth. And it was sort of like the crowning pinnacle of any pilot's career to fly either the U-2 or the SR-71, because or as a test pilot, the X-15, because you do fly more as an astronaut than a pilot, without ever having to deal with the astronaut office at NASA, which is notoriously a horrid place to have to deal with. So that's all I've got really about the U-2. It was a brief stub on that, a brief stub on Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and then we're going to roll into... Yes.
I recall a couple of people in my immediate acquaintance were in Seattle at the flight museum they have there.
Yes, I've been there.
What was on display?
The SR-71.
Yes, but not the U-2.
No, not the U-2.
Okay,
it was the SR-71 with an unmanned drone on top of it. Like the SR-71 is old technology from the 60s. Then there's this new like A-1 drone, which is also supersonic and super stealth, that they started launching from the SR-71 in 1992, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's next episode.
Already.
Okay.
Any comments, questions, queries, concerns, statements, or outbursts regarding Skunk Works or the U-2?
No, that's great. I didn't know any of that. That's super.
I
knew a little bit about Francis Gary Powers, and that was it.
I think just a lot of that, like, physics and how much goes into it scares me a little. You know?
Yeah, I mean, and it was this one aircraft designer, whose name escapes me, but he designed both the U-2 and the SR-71 before there was computers. So he was basically hand sketching super stealth aircraft. And the U-2, I mean, since it only flew in Russia for a little while, they stopped flying it over Russia when Frank Powers was shot down. It's still used, and it was used by the CIA at the time. NASA still uses it, and the United States Air Force still use it for calibrating satellites.
Oh, right.
Among other things, doing high altitude weather observation where they're not using balloons, and calibrating spy satellites, because you've got to be.
That's a good cover.
It is, yeah. They're observing the weather. They're testing the jet stream.
It's a weather balloon.
Yes, a weather balloon.
Yeah, and speaking of before computers were invented, if anybody has read the book or seen the movie Hidden Figures, a lot of these companies used and employed African American women to do all the math for them because they were cheap to employ and they were reliable. So all these years of engineering and spacefaring before the age of computers is on the backs of African American women.
Speaking of women, the Apollo 11 mission that first landed men on the moon, the computer for that spacecraft, the code for which was written by a woman. So yeah, women got us to the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a good job because we made it.
Yep.
Woo!
And back.
Wow.
Alrighty
then.
Wow.
Well, that's been this episode. I'm Ood Gallifrey.
I'm Leon Filger, in studio with us.
I'm out of here. No, I'm Dan West.
And
Chelsea B.
And join me after the palate cleanser, where I'm going to read an email from a fan that disagrees with the podcast, and I'm going to play a few promos from our podcast friends. And since that was a fairly easy episode, no killing. No death in this episode. Isn't that nice once in a while? We're going to play the palate cleanser on our way out. That's also nice and easy. The audio quality is a little poor, but, since it's an old classic, I think it just adds to its charm. It is Grave in the Pines by Clayton McMitchin. Enjoy.
In the pines, where the sun never shines, you'll shiver when the cold wind blows. There's a grave in the pines, where the sun never shines. There's a grave that's shaded with the pines. My true love lies in a narrow grave in the pines where the sun never shines. She's snow lies deep on my true lover's grave in the pines, in the pines, in the pines. sigh and tell of our love in the pines where the sun never shines. But now she's gone like the turtle dove in the pines, in the pines, in the pines. That icy grave that lies on the hill, I know she's cold up there. I loved her dearer than all this world, for there never was one so fair. I'm an old-time round who's done gone down. This life is blank to me. For the only one I ever loved was taken away from me. I have my friends, I have my foes, but life to me is blind. She's sleeping now in a cold, dark grave in the pines, in the pines, in the pines. I'm going away, but I won't come back on a lonesome railroad line. But I can't forget that sweet little girl who sleeps in the pines, in the pines.
Alrighty, we have an email from Richard. You should meet the guy from Louie. I think you guys would be good friends. The letter starts, "Hey guys, I think you glossed over the fact that words are not enough to convict a person a little too quickly, and I think you didn't get the essence of what Amanda Knox wrote. The following sums it up pretty much. Quote, Carter may not be innocent in a moral or philosophical sense, but she was wrongfully convicted. That is the argument. No one is claiming she wasn't very much in the wrong or isn't guilty in a moral sense. The question is a legal one. Is she legally guilty of manslaughter? If you said to someone to jump off the cliff and the person actually does it, are you guilty of manslaughter? No is the answer because there is the assumption of free will. The person chose to jump and it's their own responsibility. So by declaring Michelle Carter legally responsible, at least partly, it follows Conrad Roy is declared mentally incompetent. He either had free choice or he didn't. If you say Michelle Carter is guilty, you're saying Conrad Roy didn't have free choice. Physically, she didn't do anything. She didn't put a gun to his head, for instance. She was miles away, so it's all strictly mentally. So your basic argument becomes, how did she make him do it? Did she take away his free will? Did she use witchcraft, voodoo? What black magic did she use so Conrad Roy couldn't be considered responsible for his own actions? So my question is, how do you get around his free will? Unlike Amanda Knox, I am not advocating for sympathy for Michelle. I do, however, concur that she should be found legally innocent of any manslaughter charges. Kind regards, Richard. And Richard from the Netherlands. Thank you very much for writing, Richard. I'm just going to set out my biases here before I begin to answer the very relevant questions you brought up. I have no college degrees of any kind. I've never been a lawyer. I've never been a police officer. I really don't have any advanced education past a high school level. I just have a passing interest in true crime and mysteries and stuff like that. I also have a bias because I've dealt with friends and family having suicidal thoughts, and some of them attempting, and some of them completing suicide attempts in the past, so I may be biased towards wanting justice for Conrad in this case, so that may be pushing me towards a direction. I also consider myself to be highly empathetic, a bit more than most people. If I see somebody else tearing up, I start to tear up right away, so when I hear of Conrad's pain and how he's hurting, I can't help but feel sorry for him and want to help him in some way. That might be condescending, I suppose, to his memory in some regard, but those are my biases set forth. Now, I think the crux of the argument that we made is when he got into his truck for the first time and turned on the carbon monoxide, The carbon monoxide began to affect his body and his brain. According to Michelle Carter's testimony in trial, when he was getting out of the truck for the first time, he was gagging and dry heaving, and he was doing some very painful coughing. And that's a sign that the carbon monoxide has leached further into his body and might theoretically have caused him some mental instability. So at that point, when he got out of the truck the first time, he was already mentally compromised. So her ordering him to get back in the truck was literally her ordering a possibly mentally compromised person back into a truck. She was taking advantage of a mentally compromised person. I believe in that regard, it could still fit the bounds of manslaughter, because she was taking advantage of a person not in their right mind. If he wasn't already affected by the carbon monoxide, he may not have chose to get back in the truck without her, and I think that's where the crux of the argument lies. And also there's certain things that surround the reality of, would he still be around, or would he have even gone through that attempt without her help? She went through a lot of past encouragement and organizing and pressure in order to get him to that spot. Although he did all the actions himself, I'm not sure he would have gotten there and gotten in that truck on that day if she was not there. It seems like he was trying to talk himself out of it while she was trying to talk him into it. Then again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I see that there has been an injustice that has been done. The death of Conrad Roy is certainly a tragedy, and I guess I just have a sense that some kind of justice should be done. I see the person that encouraged him to do so, and I want her punished in some way. And now that you've explained a bit more about what Amanda Knox really means, I did gloss over that comment initially. I see what you mean. She may not be guilty of manslaughter, but I feel that she is morally responsible. So I find myself in the awkward position of agreeing with Amanda Knox. Isn't that funny? So thank you very much for your letter, Richard. I both agree and disagree in different spots, but as always, I love feedback. We're just three idiots sitting up in Canada here, drinking beer, smoking weed, and talking about weird and horrible things, and I fully expect that many of our listeners will be far smarter than us, and I hope to read much more wonderful emails like this. So thank you very much, Richard. Next up, I'm just going to play a couple promos from some of my podcasting friends. Now, they've been kind enough to mention me on their podcast, and it's one of the reasons that we got to 10,000 downloads so quickly. So I'm going to give them a little hand back, and I'm going to play some of their promos. So if any of these sound good to you, please go listen to them, or at least check them out, give them a little listen. Put an episode on while you're washing the dishes, and by the time those plates are clean, if you like it, subscribe. Let's get this whole podcast family thing going. So here they are.
Hello, Occulte Veritatis listeners and future friends. I'm Mike Brown, half of the Dark Poutine podcast. You'll probably find Scott hiding under a bed or peering through a window somewhere. I don't know where he is. If you're interested in a podcast with a focus on Canadian true crime and weird Canadian history told by two goofballs who know nothing about anything, then Dark Poutine is for you. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or any other podcast directory, or simply check us out at www.darkpoutine.com. One day we'll get around to collaborating with the fine folks here at Occulte Veritatis for a very special episode. Stay tuned. Finally, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
And Mike and Scott have put out many new episodes. A favorite of mine is when they talk about one of the largest non-nuclear explosions on Earth that happened right in Halifax in Canada here. That's definitely a must-listen, but I feel that all their episodes are definitely bingeable, so go give them a try.
What if your loved one went missing? What would you do to get them back?
Police have been looking for Ivan Aguilar. He went missing in May 2014 at the age of 15.
About a little girl who seemingly vanished from Milwaukee. Alexis Patterson
was reported missing by his adoptive father.
We started this podcast to help find the missing, who aren't otherwise covered in the media. We call, we request information. We're still left with nothing, and we need your help to solve them.
Somebody out there has to know something.
Mommy wants you home. I want my baby.
I miss her. I miss her.
Join us for our true crime podcast that covers the disappearances of missing minorities and LGBTQ persons. These cases are solvable. Someone just needs to listen. This is the Missing Minority Project podcast.
And the Missing Minority Project. Now, some podcasts are important, some are entertaining. I feel that the Missing Minority Project is both. You know, here at Occulti Veritatis, we have lots of fun, we drink some stuff, and we talk about serious issues, but a lot of what we talked about has been talked about before in different mediums or articles and stuff like that. At the Missing Minority Project, they look into the disappearances of people that are often ignored. Just like we talked about on our first episode, members of minority communities are often deprioritized by social, legal, and political systems when they go missing, and there's little or no effort put into finding them. And the Missing Minority Project looks into the disappearances of minority people and LGBT people. So if you want to hear stories of disappearances and tragedies that may not be told otherwise, please go give the Minority Project a listen. You can find them on Twitter, or if you type their name into any pod finder, you'll probably stumble upon them. And finally, and this has been long overdue, we have a user on Twitter that has been replying to and retweeting and liking everything we're putting out. She's been, honestly, the most active person on our social media, and she's been with us every step of the way from the start, and I just want to really give her some props and some appreciation. So, Maria Barber, if you're out there, thank you for all the support. I'm glad you're enjoying the show, and it's honestly humbling to have somebody out there that cares about this little project that I'm doing in my spare room. So, to you and to all our other fans, you guys have a lovely January. I hope you make it to next episode. Let's hope Trump doesn't fire a nuke and begin the nuclear age over again, but, you know, have a good time. We're all going to make it. This is going to be the year. Goodbye.